At the
Ow.
bad one?
Oh,
Wow.
that's great. I'm so glad you're getting better fast. That's awesome.
Robert, are you actually outside? Oh,
No.
okay.
Every now and then you see as he moves, it ripples around the
Yeah,
edge.
yeah,
Beautiful backdrop, though. That's
yeah.
awesome. Al, you got some
Tired of The
prints on the
Simpsons,
wall.
huh?
If
Al.
anybody's in here just looking at the speaker view, you can click on the view up at the top right corner and like us see everybody in a grid to get a view of everyone. All right, so we still got a minute here.
We're live. It's 10 a.m. Welcome everyone.
Wow. Welcome everybody. It's a few less people than signed up today. I wonder what's going on. Oh well, it'll probably have some more people popping up, but we got everybody in the house here of our normal kind of moderators. I'm lucky enough to have Rick and Woody and Darren and David, and all of those guys are unmuted. Everybody else is muted just because you get too many people talking at once and nobody can understand anything. I see the top of David's face on a beautiful beach with waves rolling in behind. There he is.
There he is.
Good to see you, man. It's fun to see some familiar faces here. So today we don't have a big set presentation and topic. We're just going to take a lot of questions and talk photography in general. We had some interesting things come up right as we were starting out. We were talking about David's had some unfortunate mishaps in South Carolina. It's David Archer's series of unfortunate mishaps, and he was just telling us he lost his D850 and his 70-200 FLED. So why don't you tell us the story, David?
Yeah, I was out shooting sunset on a lake, and I had my waders on, because the angles are all out in the water about waist, knee deep to waist deep. So walking around, and there were some sketchy people on the beach, so I didn't leave my backpack on the beach. So I had my Shimoda backpack with me, and accidentally kind of stepped in a hole and got didn't fall down or anything, but got a lot deeper than I anticipated. Bottom half of my backpack got filled with water. The camera body and lens were in there and unfortunately turned on. So when I realized it, I got back to the shore and the mirror was flipping back and forth, blip, 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 blip.
Ouch.
And it ended up just frying. There's water.
Was it salt water?
No,
No.
it was fresh water. It was the original. It was the 7200 VR, not the FL.
Okay.
It was the previous one, which I intended to update anyhow.
I'm glad you didn't.
But luckily, I have a good insurance policy. It's a rider on my homeowner's policy, and it's replacement coverage. But I've had to use it a few times before, and I'm afraid that they're going to cancel me. In fact, my agent told me to wait just a little bit before
you lost it.
They paid my drone. I crashed my drone the same place in the water, and they paid it off just a few months ago.
Yeah.
So,
well,
I guess it's a bad risk.
It's interesting. It's one of those little things, keep your stuff turned off. It's easy to just toss it in the bag, though. I certainly do that sometimes too. Hey, Bill. But there are times where, if you get your camera a little bit inundated with water or something, you make sure you shut that thing off or keep it. If it's off, don't turn it on. Yeah. Get it into a big bag of rice. That's the best hope for recovering an inundated piece of electronics equipment like that. Phone, anything, just get it in a bag of rice, leave it overnight, dry it completely out, take the battery out, leave everything open. But yeah, when it's turned on, a lot of times it fries everything. And if it's salt water, you don't have a whole lot of hope. It's interesting you brought that up about the insurance policy, though, because I had a similar thing happen years and years ago. My first 70-200 VR lens, before they even made the VR2, I hopped out of a boat pulling up on this beautiful, pristine beach in Tanzania, and I saw this shot, and I switched lenses. I went to my 14 to 24 from my 70 to 200, and I jumped out of this little dhow that I'd rented that was dropping me off on this sandbar off Zanzibar into the shallows of the Indian Ocean, and I didn't zip the little quick access spot on my old low pro pack shut. And when I hopped out of the boat, the weight of the 70 to 200, it just slipped out and dropped in the water. And I looked down, and it was in like 3 feet of water, like a big black turd in salt water. And I just was like, oh, and it was gone. But then I went to try to get it replaced by my rider on my homeowner's insurance. And at that point, I was selling photography. I had prints for sale and photo services advertised on the web, and my homeowner's policy went and typed in my name in photography, and they said, "Oh, this is a business that nullifies your homeowner's policy. If you're selling prints even on your website, you can just forget about it." So,
yeah, that's true.
That's something to keep in mind for sure. And you might, if you do, for now, because I run workshops and everything, I have a separate comprehensive general liability policy that has equipment and insurance coverage and coverage in case there's an accident or something. But
can I ask a question, Hudson?
Sure, Rick.
So you are a professional, and you have Nikon. Are you like a member of the Nikon
professional services? Yeah.
So is that an instance where you could send a camera like that had gone through something like that back, and would they fix it?
They'd look at it. Yeah, I mean, Nikon will look at it for anyone too. The Nikon Professional Services doesn't give you a cheaper repair, or it gives you priority repairs where you get a really quick turnaround and free shipping and things like that, but you don't get a deal on repairs. So, and I got a feeling they'd probably take a look at David's camera and it'd be like a totaled car,
Yeah.
They'd send it back to you in a package and say, we'll send you, here's the cost of a new D850.
And so is the lens gone because of the electrical connections to the D850 that it was all on?
It's a little bit clouded inside, down in the camera end. It looks clear down in the long end, but down we attach to the camera is cloudy.
Did you put it in rice?
No, I haven't yet.
No. Okay.
I intended just to hopefully just replace it with the new S model.
Yeah.
Right. Go ahead.
You have a backup, right? You shoot with what, the D4 or?
Yeah. I have a D5 and a D500,
right?
And the Z6 too.
So you're not ready to go whole hog on the Z system at this point.
I don't know. I could go for the Z7 too. That would be an excuse to, but now they've announced this new Pro body that's going to come out later this year. That's going to be all things to all people.
Well, it sounds like that camera, and what we're talking about is one of the heads of Nikon's imaging division last week did an interview with DP Review and talked about the sort of next generation Z camera that sounds like they're really targeting that D5 shooter. Yeah. Much like Sony was targeting, sort of the ultra high end camera. But I think they're they're going to announce it later this year, Hudson, is that right? And then we're thinking maybe next year it'll show up.
I mean, they said coming this year, but typical Nikon is the big cameras kind of get announced in the fall and they don't really start shipping until the next year. But who knows? I mean, yeah. I do think it's an interesting time for DSLR shooters of any brand. Clearly Sony's DSLRs were kind of a hybrid DSLR, and they went away once the A7 series really started going. Canon is clearly moving full guns into mirrorless, and I don't see a lot of people picking up the 5D series anymore now that the R5 and those cameras are out there. And I think that probably the D850 that David just lost into the water is going to stand as a pinnacle of DSLR design. And I just, Nikon nobody has money to be developing dual camera lines, particularly one that's more of a kind of a legacy line. You know, Rick and I were talking recently, and you know, having shot enough of these mirrorless cameras, and everybody talks about whose autofocus is ahead. Well, I think that it's very clear to me that the autofocus is going to get leaps and bounds ahead of what that can be done with an optical rangefinder system, the way that SLRs are right now. That it's been developed for years and years and years and gotten very, very good. But the ability to recognize moving subjects on the sensor for the computer's processors to determine what you want to track. You know, I've got this new drone. It's a Skydio, and it's really designed to track subjects. It's not so much a drone that you would fly in to get the perfect shot where you're directing it. It's more autonomous. It's more of a robot drone, and it'll see all the people or vehicles in the landscape and identify those as vehicles or people. And it puts a little flag up. And if you tap your phone or whatever controller you're using, if you tap that little identifier, all of a sudden a little blue circle starts spinning around the person or the car. And it's just tracking, focusing, following, staying at whatever angle you want to that vehicle or person. And that's definitely the future with digital cameras too, whether you're doing stills or video. And I could picture a time when, you know, right now it feels like a lot of the complexity of it is figuring out how we should be controlling that. How do we determine what we're tracking? And to me, the thing that you're not using, you know, maybe this wouldn't work as well for event shooters or, you know, if you're in a church or someplace where you're gonna be quiet, but I think that they could set up a system where different things light up that you could choose to track different colors on your viewfinder, and you literally say red, you know, and your camera starts tracking the one that's marked red, the person marked red in the frame. Your camera is auto-focusing on that, you know, that the eyes of that person, that vehicle, that animal. It would literally identify different subjects moving within the frame, and you could just speak to it. Or there could be, you know, a way to use finger controls, the joystick, if you're in a quiet situation like a wedding or something. It's just fascinating where it's all going. It's clear that having that autofocus system on the sensor is where it's all going to go, and it will eclipse DSLRs. And clearly the lens design, not having to scoot the lens way out away from the sensor to have a mirror in between, is enabling the engineers to build lenses better. So I think that all the brands are pushing towards mirrorless. So with David losing the D850, it would be a tough thing to advise somebody, well, buy another D850 right now. I just think things are changing. You know, you've got, and you know, the truth is you've got a Z6 and you've got a D5. You don't have a big megapixel gun right now, David, but when we usually want to be using big giant megapixel cameras, we're usually shooting for a print. We're shooting static landscapes and things like that. You can shoot panoramas with a 24 megapixel camera and make a 40 megapixel image just fine with 5 overlapping shots. You know, it's not a big deal.
So just to move forward a bit, so if you want, supposedly Nikon Rumors today says that there's going to be an announcement tomorrow, just more of a teaser type thing. So nikonrumors.com. I can't imagine that there really is going to be any substantive information about this camera for a while.
No.
And then there was one question Elizabeth had that I thought was a good one. Do you have any recommendations for a good insurance company specifically for photographic equipment? Or is that just something you just start with your insurance company and see what you can do? Or
again, with regard to insurance, you know, as we were just talking about with David and his loss, I think that you have to be extremely careful if you have a website that even offers prints for sale, because they will find an excuse to deny claims. Now, you know, I will also say that if that ever happens to someone, when that happened to me, it was with, I think, State Farm. And I said, well, you know, no one ever told me that my insurance rider that I've been paying for these last 6 years wouldn't apply if I'm a photographer. And so I was able to get them to refund all the extra premiums that I've been paying for that, which more than compensated me for the lens that I lost. It wound up, I've been providing my own insurance in that way. But I think that you need to have a discussion with your homeowner's insurance agent and just find out whether or not you can get your camera equipment covered. And you should have a list of the expensive stuff and keep it updated. Just do a little Google spreadsheet or something and file that with them so that you really know what's going on, serial number and and camera body and lens and computer system. If you can't get it, you know, you could look through some of the professional organizations. Yeah, what's the organization that Dan's the head of? I'm having a little brain lock here in Oregon. You know, a lot of these.
The Portland or the Oregon, I can't remember.
Chapter of the
PPA.
national.
The PPA, Professional Photographers Association.
That's it. Yeah.
That's a national organization, and they actually provide information on a bunch of services for that. If you can't get your stuff insured because you are quote unquote a photographer who somehow is making money, they're probably a good organization to be part of.
Right.
Okay, I'm just
running through questions.
The other thing that I would say, so, and David, you said you were going to get a kayak too. And the one thing that I would say is, do you have a good dry bag to put your gear in when you're out there on the lake or wherever?
Yes. And I'm buying a what they call a fishing kayak, and it's made by Hobie, and it's very wide and very stable. You know, anything can flip, but this is almost next thing up to a little John boat, so it's quite stable.
Right.
But
they're made to be able to cast off of and haul something in, and
yeah.
And you're getting the one that has the pedal power. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Propulsion underneath that you just pedal like a bicycle. Kind of cool.
Yeah, and it goes 360 degrees, so
Nice.
able to maneuver around with hands free when you got your camera to your eye.
Yeah.
Nice.
So
Nice.
Well, when we went up the falls, with Matt Kloskowski a few years ago up in the gorge, we all went and got dry bags, and I always know where my dry bag is. You know, if I'm going to go out anywhere near where I think I'm going to be actually on water, you know, I'm going to pop my little insert from the backpack into that dry bag and keep my camera and gear in there, and only pull it out when I'm going to use it, and make sure that I wrap it back up. So.
Cetus Summit does some really nice, really affordable, lightweight dry bags. They won't put a huge dent in how much weight you're carrying in your bag, and they fold up really small. I don't think that they're designed to wear and tear and last for years, you know, like someone doing river runs on a regular basis or something like that. But in an emergency pinch, they're really good, and they're certainly light and small. So
I've got a couple of them. I've got a Dakeen, a bigger one that will fit that f-stop, that big unit they have. And then I've got a couple of smaller ones that work with just, you know, the Sony and a lens, maybe a second lens. So, but they're definitely worth having. Yeah.
Darren had a question I saw on YouTube. I'm just kind of going over some of the things Darren's moderating. And there was one that was about people asking on a solid tripod using a 3-second shutter delay. Would that remove vibration on a D850, or should you still have a wireless or cable release? You know, a lot of cameras, Nikon has for some time, I think maybe with the D800 was the first one, but for quite a while now, they have an exposure delay mode. And you can literally, it's like mirror lockup, even if you're shooting with a mirrorless camera. Mirror lockup was an old mode that we had back in the day where you'd probably still use a cable release, and you hit the cable release and it raised the mirror and all that vibration stopped, and you hit the cable release again and it just opened and closed the shutter and the mirror dropped. That way you kind of got rid of that shake that could come from the mirror bouncing around inside the mirror box. And you know, they took that idea and created a mode, since everything was going so digital, where you hit the button and you can program the delay, and in the DSLRs it raises the mirror, waits that delay, opens and closes the shutter, drops the mirror again. And with mirrorless cameras, it just gives you that delay where you can push the button and take your hand away. And I often use it at a half a second, and I don't use a cable release. You know, I use mirror lockup a lot when I'm suddenly doing something on my tripod and I'm like, ooh, that's a little bit longer shutter speed. Why not just build in a little buffer so I can hit the button, take my hand away, then it takes the shot. Mirror, yeah, exposure delay works just fine in lieu of a cable.
All right. One question that's sort of still in this whole DSLR to mirrorless. Using a D50 once to get into big megapixel cameras. I use Z7 with an FTZ as a pretty attractively priced camera. Am I being short-sighted, not going directly to the Z7 II?
Yeah, there's a few things that the twos bring that are nice additions. For someone who's a hybrid shooter like me, I shoot a lot of video just doing what I do. And it's nice having 2 card slots just so that I can write video to one card and stills to another and not mix those two on one card. Some people want to have backup. I do. I don't mind. I know. I don't think
this is
it's a
the man
deal breaker.
who when the Z came out,
I think it's silly that people thought it was a deal breaker, because I think the XQD cards and the Compact Flash Express cards are so bomb-proof and durable that it shouldn't be a big deal as long as you make sure they're in good shape. But I mean, it is handy. It also has a much larger buffer, so you don't run out of fast action frames if you're shooting fast action. Say you're shooting a little sports or wildlife. You know, with the Z7, it's bap 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 bap.
Right, but this question is very specifically about landscape photography.
Yeah, it's not a big deal. The only things that I would miss in the landscape are twofold. One is, let's say you're running out of battery and you've got your focus all perfectly dialed. With the Z7 II and the Z6 II, they have a setting you can turn on where it remembers exactly where you were focused if you're using one of those fly-by-wire S lenses, and it remembers exactly where you were focused. So you can literally turn off the camera and spin that ring around all you want, change the battery, turn it back on, and it's right where you left it. Whereas if you turn off the camera with the Z7 or the Z6, it's going to reset to infinity, or its close approximation of infinity. And then the other thing is the fact that you can go to 900 seconds with metered shooting in the modes, whether you're in manual mode or aperture or shutter priority. It will let you do long exposures with neutral density, you know, clear out to over an hour, which is pretty darn cool, an hour and a half. And it's metering everything. So instead of having to use something like a Pluto trigger or a Foolography Unleashed or some app to do really long exposures accurately, the camera will just do it built in, which is nice. Other than that, they're the identical sensor. It's just everything's a little faster. Autofocus is a little bit better, but in the landscape, you should be manually focused, zooming in, checking everything really in high detail anyway. You'll get the same exact image quality. It is a good deal getting a Z7. You know, when the new camera comes out, they're all going to look a little bit old, probably.
Yeah. But I'll say I've been shooting with an A7R III now, which is at this point a 4-year-old camera, and there's not much that I feel like I need with an A7R4 or the A9 II. They'd be nice to have, but So.
Although, what are you about to order?
I haven't pulled the trigger yet. So
he's looking at that A1 though. Yeah.
Well, we have to test it. We do have to test it. So
we do need to test it.
Let's see here. Some other questions. So we had an interesting question about lens profiles and Lightroom, which actually expands to pretty much any editing app, where Reno, I think was his name, said he uses the Z cameras, and when he's in Lightroom's develop mode, there's that little eye down at the bottom of the lens correction section that says built-in lens profile assigned.
Why don't I share my screen really fast? Do you want me to share my screen? Yeah. I've got a perfect example of that. So you can keep talking.
So the question is it's like, should I go in and turn on the lens profiles to make it to match it with the lens. But then when I go to try and do that, I don't get my lens. It picks some other Nikon lens, and what's going on, and you know, what do I need to worry about? And this is not just the Nikon thing. This is not just a Lightroom thing. It's this whole issue of that's come up in the last few years where the camera manufacturers for their lenses are creating these lens profiles that we used to live by in Lightroom way back when. So you want to take it from there, Hudson?
Yeah, so this is when I was out with Charlie Johnson in Brookings, where we're going to be running a workshop at the end of August, beginning of September. And we went to the Pistol River. I did a little kiting, and he took along his new 24 to 200, and I had the 70 to 200 and the 500, and we were doing a little shooting and just kind of comparing lenses. And this is with my S70 to 200. And you can see, if I click on this little eye button here and the built-in profile is applied, the minute I click on enable profile corrections, I get the default setup, which is the built-in profile. So most of these new mirrorless cameras, lenses, the newest lenses that are coming out, are coming with metadata embedded profiles for what aperture it's shooting at and what situation it is for that particular lens that gets fed into the raw file. And then your processing software just picks it up and applies it automatically if you have profile corrections set. And they don't even add these lenses to the list. So if I chose instead to come down and search for my lens under Nikon, if I click on it and I go through this entire thing, it's choosing the closest lens to it, which would be the FLED. And it's changed. It's not the right profile. That's the profile for the old 70 to 200 lens. You won't find that new lens's profile in the drop-down list because it's the automatic one that you need to go up to the top and choose built-in again. So you go to auto and choose the built-in, and that's the correct profile correction for your new higher tech lens that has the built-in corrections. They don't need to add those to the list. So whether you're shooting with Sony or Nikon or Fuji or any of these cameras, the latest lenses are going to have built-in profiles applied in the raw file that just get automatically applied. Does that make sense?
And that works on one, that works in Capture One. I imagine it also works in Luminar and anything else. They're just, because it's now baked into the raw file, you don't have that, if you're using an older lens and you turn that profile correction on, you will see a change on screen live. But for these lenses with the built-in profiles, it's just automatically applied. There's no way to unapply it even. So,
right.
So, okay.
That was a really good question, though.
Yeah, it is a good question, and it was worth talking about.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask this, and I'm going to know that I know that you're not going to have an answer for it, but I have an answer for it. So, so now that On One can be used as plugins for Capture One, have you tried Capture One using On One as a plugin, and if so, how did you like it? Hudson, you haven't even used it, right?
I mean, I have played with Capture One in the past.
Right.
And it like Aperture, it seems like a less intuitive but very powerful photo processing program.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, it's very powerful. It's just, less intuitive. It's more, you have to kind of go diving in and really dig into the internals of it to figure it out. And since I've been a Lightroom person from the beginning, and I like On One because of its intuitive nature, I just haven't felt the need to dig into it. So
yeah.
No, I haven't tried it.
I mean, as an app, Capture One is very powerful. I don't believe it's any more powerful than Lightroom, On One, Luminar, any of those guys. I mean, you're going to be able to do your basic editing. It's got some finish editing stuff in it, but not a lot, which is one of the reasons why I know the On One guys added it to its plugin universe. And it works pretty much the same way that On One works with Lightroom. It sends off a baked file that you edit, and then it sends it back to Capture One, and you've got sort of a version of your original raw file. But I have some friends who love Capture One. They swear by it, But if you talk to them, they will, one, it's takes quite a while to master. The equivalent of the library module in Lightroom or Browse in On One is much less intuitive. Um, so, almost everybody I know who uses Capture One uses it primarily because they want to be able to buy perpetual license software and they don't want to pay Adobe.
Or
it's
they're
quite
phase one
expensive.
users.
Yeah. Yeah, right. But there aren't a lot of those guys. So
No, there are. But they all like Capture One.
right. Yeah. Um, let's see.
Hey, on the topic of software, right? Hudson, have you looked into the new NX Studio from Nikon yet?
I downloaded it and I have not fired it up and test driven it yet, but I certainly intend to in the next couple of weeks. I've never been a giant fan of Nikon's editing and organizing software, but it's something all new. I will give it a shot, see what I think.
And did you use the really old Capture NX?
I tried
with
it.
the-
I was never
With the
yeah.
It was it was a great product if you were a Nikon user back in the day. I mean,
Yeah.
this was before their second. They discontinued it, and then a couple of years later, they came out with a new NX that was nothing
Terrible.
like the original one. Yeah, it was horrible.
The original one where you could do custom curve profiles and all that stuff, it was pretty cool. I did play around with that back in my only in Photoshop days, and I had friends that were just huge fans of it, and then they kind of blew it apart. It was like Final Cut Pro that way, like they dumbed it down and kind of it there. But
a couple of things around the Capture One. Bill Marhofer says that it's got great shadow recovery capability in Capture One, but quite a steep learning curve to become proficient in its use. Jim asks if the original render of RAW is better in Capture One versus Lightroom. When I did a dive into Capture One last year, I think it's like what I've found recently with the Canon versus Epson printers. You're going to get the images you want. You're going to be able to tweak your raw files to the way that you need to tweak them. I don't think we're at the place where you really do have to start evaluating, is this raw engine better than this raw engine type of thing, So, I mean, I think you could pick either of those, on one. You could do, Luminar's raw engine is not bad. Everybody
they
pretty
all
much
have
seems to
strength.
have cracked the code there, and they all have issues. Every one of them will have issues, I can guarantee you, with some raw files and some ways that you're dealing with things,
Yeah. And each of them is a little bit different in the way they handle things. Like I noticed when I'm working in Lightroom, raw processing a file, the white slider and the highlight slider is very powerful at recovering highlights. And on one, they're just really weak at recovering highlights. And yet, if you grab the exposure slider and pull it just a little bit, all of a sudden, whoop, here comes back your highlights. I mean, they all have their little special sauce. They're interpreting that data and processing it differently. You just have to sort of figure out the one you want to use most or the few you want to use most and how to get the look that you're after.
Yeah.
None of them are going to get a perfect look right when they import the image. That's for sure.
Right. Let's see here.
We had some questions about star trackers and stuff.
Right. Yeah, there was a question from Jim, sort of just like, it was very detailed, asking about comparisons between trackers and stacking software and all that sort of stuff, and thought this might be a good opportunity to just sort of refresh people on. You did an ATS recently, and you're thinking about doing a course on this stuff as well, right?
Yeah, I'm going to do a course. My goal is to get it out sort of for the North American Milky Way season. That it's going to be a short course on what I really think is just the best way to do Milky Ways these days. I've gone through it for a lot of years. I did the 500 rule, and you get, the better our cameras got, the less well that rule worked. It was more for the film days and the early days of digital when we didn't have as much resolution. And now, with these lenses that are so capable for dark sky work and sensors that are up over 30, 40, 50 megapixels, you're seeing that rule, if you do a 30-second exposure at 14 millimeters, you're still getting the Earth's rotation, and the stars are not pinpoints. And plus, you're dealing with a lot of noise. And a lot of us love to print big. We want large and largeable images. So, you can use a lower megapixel camera at high ISO and get better quality images. But the most fun thing I've been doing is using a tracker where you just set up, orient it so that the axis of rotation underneath the head that you're using for the camera is revolving with itself aligned with the Earth's axis of rotation, so that it just counteracts the Earth's rotation and keeps the stars still. And you're going to take a foreground shot and you're going to take a star shot. And, I started experimenting with that year before last, and I did a lot of research, and I wound up getting one kind of mount, one kind of head, an iOptron Sky Guider Pro. It's a great star tracker. Rick's got it right now.
Yeah.
We were using it together, and it'll hold down a long lens and do deep sky stuff if you want, but it's a pain in the butt to get oriented, particularly after it gets late at night and all the stars are out on a moonless night when you'd like to be working. It's really difficult to determine whether the star you're looking at through that little scope is actually the North Star or not. Even if you got your eyes on it, it's not as bad early in the evening when the constellations start coming out and those are the only stars that you see. But if you want to do more than one shot, if you want to move locations, if you want to move around, plus it's big and it's heavy. I was carrying it in a separate Pelican case. That's when I got a hold of the Move Shoot Move, and I read a lot of reviews, and I tried a couple other little lightweight trackers that just didn't seem to be worth much. The Move Shoot Move is so small, so light, and because that little laser, you can just I can move in like a minute to get to the new location, get level, shoot it at the North Star, bam, and it's good enough for wide angle landscape work of the type that I like to do. It's not probably a perfect alignment if you were going to shoot some nebula with a 1,000 millimeter lens. I'm sure it's not perfect, but for a 14 millimeter lens, it's doing plenty to keep the stars pinpoint.
I will
And
say
it's
that
durable.
Yeah, when we were out that night in Cottonwood last month, and I was using the optic, it does a great job, but man, it is a bear to use. And just sitting there watching you just sort of move from place to place with the Move Shoot Move. It really is move, shoot, move.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't want to move my tripod at all because I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to have to realign everything.
It can take an hour or more. Yeah. And you
Yeah.
lose everything. Whereas the Move Shoot Move, it's literally like 30 seconds. And I think a lot of people, they used to do a thing where it was kind of a motion control thing too. It was more for time lapse. And I think people got upset because that kind of went away and it's really about star tracking. That's really what the Move Shoot Move is all about. And for me, it's always been the fact that I can shoot 4 or 5 different compositions in the night and be moving around with it. Plus, it fits where a smaller lens would fit in my bag. It's just not a big deal to carry. It's so easy to use. I've had a lot of people talk to me about, well, aren't you concerned shooting a laser up into the sky with pilots and things? Well, one of the things is if you're working late at night and you're a responsible human being, you can see planes pretty well. They all have identifying lights on them. I would never turn it on and point it anywhere near an aircraft at night. And you're really only using that laser for about 10 seconds to just get the thing lined up on the North Star and turning it off. It will actually overheat if you leave it turned on too long. It's in the instructions not to run it for more than 30 seconds. It's just a quick alignment tool. And so it's just a joy to look at the images that you get. You can shoot, I go out and I use the Z7 or the Z7 II at, 500 ISO for a minute and a half, 2 minutes at wide open with a really good lens like the new 14-24 or the 21.8 or a good Rokinon 14 or any of those lenses, and it because the camera's moving and you're at low ISO, you just get these beautiful star fields. Now your foreground's blurred, so you're going to need to do a little composite work, but There's a whole course coming on it, but that's
Yeah.
my reasoning and rationale for why I'm using what I use.
And that ATS talks about that as well,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So
there's a really recent, I don't know if it
Yeah.
wasn't last week, it was the week before last, I think.
Yeah.
But
okay.
really recent.
And I hope I'm getting this right. Aid, Russell? Okay, Aid says that the lasers are eye safe at 37,000 feet. So
Are they? Well, there you go. I still wouldn't point it at them. I still wouldn't point it at 'em. I'm not pointing that laser at anybody. If anybody's used this move, shoot, move, it is literally like a lightsaber into the stars, and you can just
Yeah, it
move
is.
that green beam until the North Star is green. And if you want to be perfectly accurate, move it a laser width or two towards the tail of the Big Dipper, and you'll be a little bit more accurately aligned. It's like a half a degree off the North Star that direction.
Yeah, I can definitely say that after that night, I felt like I would rather have a move, shoot, move for all of the star work that I do. I think if I were, really into astronomy and that type of photography, the optic really probably would be a better, but I'd probably be better at sighting.
Yeah.
I'd probably be better at setting those scopes too, because I'd understand the sky a little better. So.
Well, it's funny. I've been talking to the Move Shoot Move folks. They've been marketing a lot these V plates and Z plates to try to get your tripod level under the moving platform. And I tested them, and it was like a diving board. I felt like with my head on it. I mean, it just creates so much flex and motion. There's no way I would use it. If you've got a good ball head like the GXP Acrotech that I use, you can shoot anywhere you want without having that platform thing. The head, can rotate and fit into its notch. But I talked to them, and they were talking about all these different things. They offer, a polar alignment scope, and it mounts the same way as the laser. And I said, if you're gonna do something like that for more deep space work and stuff, you should build a bigger one and put the polar alignment scope through the center of it, like iOptron does, so it's really accurate. But then add a laser that you can turn on too that recharges with the thing, so that you can get the thing lined up where you're pointed at the North Star. Turn off the laser, then look through the thing, and what star you have in there and get it dialed in. And they love that idea, so they may act on that and build a second version that's bigger. And that'd be great if you wanted to do deep space kind of stuff. I mean, I think that's why iOptron makes such a good one for deep space work, and it's because they're a telescope company. They're making stuff for deep space work, where an astronomer they'll spend hours getting their polar alignment perfect, and then they don't move their scope, they build a building over it. That's what they do. So
all right, well, so completely different topic. Aid actually had a question for us. Wanted to ask about vibration reduction with the Z system. Whether you turn it off when you're on a tripod. And he said, I also hear you talking a lot about the auto area autofocus picking up subjects really well when you pan with them. In this scenario, you're also switching VR over to sport mode or not?
From what I've always heard from Nikon, and I haven't heard anybody say this has changed, their sport mode is paparazzi mode. It's when you're riding on the back of a moped, bouncing along a road, trying to photograph the people in the limousine with someone else driving. You're like, your long lens, it's like extreme shake. You're trying, if you're in sport mode, I would turn off VR on the tripod. I think in normal mode, the cameras have gotten so good. I think it's a really good idea to turn off if you're doing really long exposures and night sky work. It's a good practice to turn off. You don't need it. The only thing it could do is harm. If you're working in windy conditions on a tripod, I think it could actually be beneficial. In the old days, in VR1 and even some in VR2, with all the different brands, that minute that you turned that mechanized little gimbal inside the lens on, and it was all lens based originally, it was working to counteract motion. And even if you weren't moving, it would try, and it would create, blur and shake when you were doing long exposures on a tripod. It would try to counteract motion that wasn't there. The new ones are so good. The processing is so much better. It's so much more refined. In practice, that's a piece of advice I give, that it's good practice to turn it off, but probably 60% of the time I forget to do it, and I've never noticed blur because of it. So I think with the
and I would
modern
say,
gear, it's so good.
yeah. I mean, with my old, when I was shooting Canon, my 70 to 200, 2.8, you had to turn it off if you were on the tripod, because otherwise you just couldn't get a sharp shot. With the 70 to 200 Sonys, I don't even worry about it. You know, I couldn't tell you whether it's on or off at this point. The only time I ever check to see if it's on is if I'm hand holding in situations where I'm worried about sharpness and I can't get a fast enough shutter speed. But yeah.
David, you've been shooting with the VR2 Nikon lens for a long time. Do you turn it off when you're on the tripod with it always?
I never can tell a whole lot of difference.
Yeah, no. I think it was really the VR1. It was a big deal. The original VR 70 to 200 lens. That was the first lens I had with vibration reduction, and it really mattered. If you didn't turn it off, it would wreck your tripod mounted shots. And I think the VR2, they got that pretty solved, and certainly the FLED and the S lens are not an issue. Again, you know, if you're doing a 2-minute exposure, I would certainly turn it off. I think it's good practice.
Yeah.
3-second exposure, you know, anything.
Yeah, I've tried comparisons, and it's really no discernible difference.
Yeah, it knows when to turn itself on.
Let's stick with lenses. Bill asked, f2.8 versus f4 lenses. Under what circumstances do you think the faster zoom lenses are really worth the additional cost, size, and weight for the traveling photographer?
Oh man, it's just less and less important with the advent of great high ISO performance. I think that if you're doing star work, that's really the only reason I want, you know, a fast aperture on a wide angle these days, is for doing night photography. You know, it does matter a lot when you're getting up into the, am I shooting at 1600 ISO or 3200 ISO? Those are big differences in the quality of the image that you get. When it comes to shooting wildlife with the big long lenses, it can make a difference, just because if you're shooting in beautiful light, you know, if you're shooting with something that's, I notice it with my 500 PF lens, it's a 5.6, and I'd rather in low light situations be shooting with my Z6 II than my Z7 II, because at a certain point past about 1000 or 1600 ISO, I get a more enlargeable image from that really clean high ISO output of the Z6 II than I would from the Z7, because it's just noisy. It's a big high megapixel landscape camera. So there are brands where the only really good quality lenses optically are the expensive fast aperture ones. But I think more and more brands have been building really high quality f4 and f5.6 lenses, you know, like the 24 to 70 Nikon kit lens that comes with the Z6 and Z7, the f4. It's sharp edge wide open at f4, and the color rendition is wonderful.
Yeah,
it's a wonderful lens, and
I think
the 500 PF is a magnificent lightweight hand holdable 500. You know, I think times have changed. You don't have to.
This is another instance where the developments in the camera industry, primarily around mirrorless, have caused a refocusing, I guess pun intended, of the whole lens design. And what we're seeing, I mean, I saw that with Sony even early on. You know, a bunch of their lenses were better than the lenses I had been using on my Canon system, you know, even though they were amazing. You know, and you're getting primes that in some instances are more expensive, but you know, you can find some really nice prime lenses, and I'd rather spend the money there. Like I've been carting around my original Sony 70 to 200 f4. I see no reason to spend $3,000 to get the 2.8. It's bigger, it's bulkier. You know, I've got enough prime lenses to sort of hit the places that I want. And, you know, the 70 to 200 is a nice light lens comparatively. You know, it sort of
Yeah.
reminds me of the old, on the Canon side, you know, people would use that 70 to 200 f4 because they didn't want the L lens, and yet that was a nice lens, you know. Canon, Canon's 24 to 105 f4 was forever their kit lens for the 5D series, and that was an amazing lens. It was so small. It was a great travel lens, you know. So I think some of it's just sort of looking for the type of work you do, but I don't think you have to go, especially, you know, for the long zooms at 2.8 unless there's a very specific need for why you have to do them. You know.
Well, I'm excited for Nikon to build a. Well, I don't know if you know. Honestly, I was pretty shocked by Charlie Johnson's 24 to 200 lens. It's not that much bigger than the 24 to 70 f4. It's got a variable aperture, and I was blown away with how sharp and high quality the images were out of it. Now, there's a difference between the way that 70 to 200 S lens renders those images and the out of focus details and all those things. You know, the one thing I'd say about a 70 to 200 is if you do like to blur the background on subjects and do portrait-like work, you know, the longer lenses, sometimes having a wider aperture will let you get a little more creative with that beautiful bokeh and that blurred background type of stuff. But, you know, in the old days, when I shot Nikon DSLRs, I really didn't like the 70 to 200 or the 70 to 300 f4s. I tried them, and they were light and they were affordable, but I just didn't like the image quality, particularly if I shot into backlight. There was just all kinds of ghosting and flare, and it just wasn't as good a lens as their 70 to 200s. And I think that's, like Rick said, really been changing. And so, you know, the world's wider open. Again, it depends on what you want to do with the lens. Like I said, I don't see a problem with an f4 wide angle lens. I mean, most of the time you're using a wide angle lens, you're out in the landscape and you're wanting a lot of depth of field. And so you're probably stopping down to f8 or f11 anyway. Having the need for that really fast one, the only reason I see for it is because I love to do star work. So, you know, that's the only reason that I got the 14 to 24 2.8, given that the 14 to 30 is so razor sharp. The 14 to 30 outperforms the old 24 or 14 to 24 f lens in the corners almost across all the apertures. It's amazing. And I loved that 14 to 24. That was my pride and joy for many, many years. My bag always had that 3-pound giant, takes the space of, you know, more than a 70 to 200 millimeter lens, chunk of glass in it. And, you know, I was able, I didn't even recognize how much better the 14 to 30 was than that lens until I realized I hadn't been using the old lens at all. I suddenly realized I haven't even taken that on a trip in a while. And I got out and I did an Approaching the Scene where I compared, when I got the new 14 to 24, I compared those three lenses, and it was shocking how much better that little 14 to 30 f4 kit lens was than the old $3,000 14 to 24. Shocking.
All right, so a little bit of time left. Let's talk tripods.
Oh, one really quick question came in via Darren and over YouTube, and it was about using the stone bags. You know, I'm a huge advocate of having a stone bag hanging below my tripod head so that you can drop, you know, a rock in here or some weight, or use it as a shelf if you're careful, and just remember, take your stuff out before you move positions. The question was, to get flat to the ground, do you need to remove it? And if you mount it up high on your tripod, actually I got this trick from David Archer. I used to mount it down here where the first joint of the leg was, but I noticed David was mounting his up high when we were in Patagonia, and I suddenly realized, well, that enables you to just, you know, it can lay on the ground up under the tripod if it's empty. I don't worry about it. It's just set right there. That's the perfect place to put it. So, bravo, David. As I said,
I'm still a bottom part of the tripod kind of guy, but I just undo the one.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to undo
the one Velcro
This,
too. So
this
yeah.
thing is literally Velcro's on. It's a piece of cake to undo. So it's the best $10 investment you can make for your tripod support on a windy day. I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Remember that
Question-
waterfall we were shooting at, David? Sorry. Go ahead.
So question about fluid heads, and have you had the opportunity to use the Leophoto BV10? Oh my. So it's significantly less costly than the Acrotech panoramic head, only slightly heavier. He's just curious about your thoughts, if you've seen it. He says it seems like a good deal, but I think when we've looked, it still doesn't really seem to compare to the Manfrotto, right?
Yeah, there are things Leophoto is doing that are just fantastic. And I feel as if the legs that they're building and the way that their spider on the top and their systematic heads and their built-in leveling adapter heads are about as nice to use as anything I've seen. They're innovative, they're light, they're beautifully machined, they're all CNC'd metal instead of cast like you see Gitza still using, and they're priced really, really well, especially for what they are. And they're responsive to their customers. There are some things that I think Leophoto came out originally as kind of a derivative company, kind of, knocking off American branded things, and they've been changing into a more innovative, super high quality company that I think they're aiming to be. I think that fluid head that they're offering is still a little bit in the past. And there's some of the things with their heads, I'm talking to them about some ways they need to change. They need to develop a better clamp system for one thing. I'm not a big fan of the clamps on the top of their heads. I see they've got a new pan and tilt head that looks a lot, it's not exactly like the Acrotech head. Let me pull up, hold on. I'll share my screen here again. Get that control on. This is their head that looks a lot more like the Acrotech pan and tilt head. It's not a fluid head, and it looks nice. It's got its own, kind of design flow. The one that you were asking about, the BV10, it's not nearly as nice a head to me as the Manfrotto. And if you look at their weights, they're not including the arm and stuff like that. I think if you take the Manfrotto, which is actually cheaper, and add on that Kirk bridge assembly, which makes it a little bit more expensive, or even just slap an Arca Swiss clamp up there, it's just, I haven't found a better system for doing everything. It weighs 2 pounds. It's affordable. It just lets you be level all through your compositions. It lets you work with a long lens. It lets you do panoramas. It's such a jack of all trades kind of a head. We had another question from someone asking, gimbals are expensive. Do you really, when would you say you really need a gimbal? I think David Archer needs a gimbal because he loves to work with his big 400 millimeter 2.8 lens and his Nikon D5. That's a magnificent combination that weighs a lot and costs as much as a lot of people spend on their cars. And so, the ability to spin that around turret style, let go, and it just stays in perfect balance wherever you want to be. This is the kind of thing where, say you're going on safari, you have a spare duffel bag for your long lens stuff. It's a full 50-pound shipped thing. You've got your big padded lens, you got your gimbal legs, and then you have your landscape and travel set up. It's totally different. I think if you're going to run around with a gimbal, you're a person who wants to set up in a specific location and shoot wildlife or shoot sports with long lenses that are really heavy and really expensive. It's a great tool for that. It's a fantastic tool for that. It's not very good for anything else, right, David? You're not going to take that out to shoot landscapes. No.
All right.
So, but the great thing about the fluid head is for someone who likes to do a little bit of everything like I do, it really is, it'll handle a big lens and a big camera. You just got to make sure you lock the tilt so it doesn't flop on you if you've got a really big head. And if you have a really big lens, and if you're using a lens like the 500 PF with mirrorless, I showed in the last video that, even if it flops, the fluid slows it down. And I think comparing the Acrotech head, people get a little confused. The Acrotech system I use has no fluid in it. So it's wonderful if you need to be really lightweight. That whole system weighs less than 4 pounds. If I'm going somewhere and I'm packing in somewhere and I really need lightweight, or I want to carry a second tripod to do some video work or time lapse while I'm shooting with my main tripod, that's just a weight saving thing. You know, not having fluid to me is really annoying. I would so much rather have my fluid head, my 5-Manfrotto fluid head for everything I do. It's always a compromise not taking that head somewhere. So.
All right. Well, I got one last softball question for you. Bobby asks, when's your next trip? Which I'm assuming means when is the next workshop?
Yeah, so we have some workshops, and I'm scrambling. I'm working on several projects right now, and you know, Woody's all over me too. Actually, I need to get these workshops up and launched, but we have plans for workshops in October. It'll start in Yellowstone, roll down through the Tetons, and into Moab. So those will be a big road trip workshop, and it looks like David and Rick will both be with me on that.
Those are three workshops, though. Those are three separate workshops.
Yes. Indeed. People can join up for more than one, and people can ride the bus. Yeah. We'll have breaks for a couple days in between each one. We're going to be before that. There is an early workshop kicking off in Brookings down on the South Coast. I'm not sure if Rick is joining me for that or if David's joining me for that. I don't know. Charlie Johnson, who lives down there and is a good friend of mine, good buddy of mine, and frequent workshop attendee, is coming on that one and helping me kind of set it up since he lives down there. And it's just one of the most fun places I've been to shoot. And we're coordinating it with a new moon to do a bunch of Milky Way stuff, weather permitting. That's usually a pretty good weather window down on the southern.
I'll be there. I will be there.
Yoo-hoo! So end of August, the last day of August through the 3rd of October, that'll launch really soon. A number of people already have markers in on that one. That's the next workshop, is the end of August through the first 3 days of September. It's a 4-day workshop. It's a long ways from anywhere, that workshop. You know, if you're willing to spend a lot of money, you can fly into Crescent City or into the Bandon Airport, or maybe even Coos Bay has a little airport. The better choices are going to be Medford or Eugene. Is probably they're not that far distant, and Eugene's probably the bigger airport. Portland's a bit of a drive. It's gonna be a bit of a drive for me. And then in November, we still have just a few slots open for Cuba. There's 2 trips, and so you know,
I think there's just one spot left. I think there's just one.
No, we had, so there's a couple who was going to go on Cuba too that they have a time conflict, and they're switching to Costa Rica. So we also have Costa Rica way out in 2022. There's just a couple spots left in that too. And then we will be talking about 2022 workshops, and we'll have some winter, spring offerings up really soon too. So there's a lot kicking off. I'm excited to get it going again. I'm really excited to get out, collaborating, having fun, having adventures, making images, learning from each other. I mean, that's the greatest thing I've ever done professionally, and I have so much fun at it. And we have a great crew doing it together. So I can't wait. And August is where we sort of feel safe with getting back out there. So.
All right, Gary's in.
Oh, and next week, or 2 weeks from today, we're going to do Rick and I have been working on a project for On One, kind of a photo kit for them on contrast, tone, exposure, and working with your histogram and camera and on the computer to master that and to really nail down exposure when you're out working. And so we're going to do mastering contrast, shooting for the edit, and talk a bit about histograms in particular next week, or 2 weeks from now, 2 weeks from today. Woody's already got that sign up, right?
That's right. Yep.
Sweet. So sign up for that, bring questions. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Rick. Thanks, Woody. Thanks, Darren. Thanks, David. Thanks to everybody who's here. Everybody stay safe, have fun.
Yep. See you in a couple weeks.
See you in a couple weeks, guys.